The 2600's 20 years old. Gee whiz. That must mean I'm 60. Or at least I feel that old.
This is my acting chairman of this thing I'm trying.
In audio?
In internet. Actually, it's a TV system. So, God, it's great you're here, son.
Oh, look at that. There's A.G. Bear and everything.
Oh, yeah, right.
There's a wonderful story about A.G. With Ron's. I told you a story, right?
What's that?
That our house was broke. The door went open from the wind, and the alarm went off, and the cops came because the alarm went off, and it was dark in there, and they said, "Is there anybody in there?" And A.G. Bear went, "Oh, I was in there." And they wasted them.
Yes!
Good to see you guys.
Yeah. Haven't seen you in many years, Al.
Yeah.
I said, look, you wanted to take. You got attacked.
Yeah, but both lawyers called me.
Tag.
Yeah.
Rock, scissors, tag.
You know.
Thank you for keeping it. You got it, yeah.
Oh, I've got this box.
Shit, I didn't have to sell the Atari lawyers called me. I said,
I got this when
these people have the
Atari
right
was
to
kind
their
of in
intellect.
this transition, and I was talking
You know, these engineers, what do they know? I mean, this is just programming. And when the Activision lawyers call me, I says, "What are you talking about? This is a trade secret. Every register was patented. I remember the patent."
Yeah, some of it was
did those things so as not to be called by either, yeah.
Neither side called me for deposition, and I was able to. However, our friend Joe, he wanted to talk.
I have the whole crate.
Joe likes to talk. Joe did 3 boxes of deposition.
Everybody was allowed in except Nolan, because Nolan would go in and cause trouble. He'd change the projects on me.
Yeah, I think we got 1, 2, 3, and there's another one that is not metal flake.
I had a wonderful time doing this stuff. I learned a lot about life in engineering and
That's really
methodology.
all the circuitry. This is just simple gate level, so that the techies will recognize this really isn't very much logic to make a video game. Basically, all the load was on the computer.
Yeah.
Group. A nice little team over there with you and Larry and Jay. And Jay came over and wanted to understand how video worked. And it took about an afternoon or something like that to go through and just explain sync and blanking. And he came back for my cheap video tricks, Alcorns, and that's all it took. And he ran with it. And Amiga was like, wow, what a job. He really got it.
From the beginning to May 1976.
Wow.
The beginning.
I remember thinking dedicated games, once you got 2 or 3 of them in the closet, were going to be clutter and problems, and $100 or even $50 a game at that time. As you started getting a bunch of them, I just thought it got really unwieldy.
Yeah.
And so it looked like the dedicated path just wasn't going to be a sustainable part.
Right, and other guys were doing that too. We had competition from GI and other manufacturers in Asia were starting to clamor on it. And our spirit at Atari was to always do the next thing and stay a year ahead of everybody else. There were also somebody else had done a bad job of a cartridge-based game.
A full cartridge game. It was
Yeah.
the one where
Oh,
all
yeah,
the games
dedicated.
were in it, but they
Yeah.
they program it so it
The
looked
Coleco
like it
thing
was a cartridge.
looked like a cartridge machine, but it had these little triangle things that clipped in. They were actually dedicated chips
Right.
with the I/O stuck in the box.
Right,
Precisely.
right. And then I think after
Stank.
we started the project, Fairchild had come out with the Channel F. Actually, they had picked up a product from some other vendor, but it didn't have terribly good games. It wasn't a great architecture.
And maybe the worst controller I'd ever seen.
Yes,
Now, they picked it up from Alpex.
yes. Who actually wound up with a patent that had some great value later on that some attorney stumbled over and sued a lot of guys over the cartridge-based system, but that's a sidelight.
There was a whole group at Atari making these dedicated chips, and it
Right.
looked like you'd have to design a whole chip, which is a pretty extensive process. I remember some initial conversations when Steve and I were down with you guys about, well, couldn't we do something that, you know, could do more than one game? Maybe we could have one that 2 or 3 could be in the same game, and then it turned into, well, what can we do with these processors, because they're starting to get cheap.
The original concept was not that it was going to be programmable where the consumer could change the cartridge, but that the factory could change the cartridge to solve the initial problem. But it was a very easy leap after that point to say, well, why can't the consumer change the cartridge? The entire budget for all the hardware had to be somewhere around $25 to $35, and which is the segue into Westcon, because there was Chuck Peddle there selling microprocessors by the barrel, and a 6800 chipset would be $50, $75. An Intel chipset would be about the same amount. And Chuck Peddle had what, for $7 for a microprocessor?
Right, and
Large volume price.
yeah, and he was actually talking $5 at the Westcon in San Francisco in fall of '75.
Right.
And that the chip also had a lot going for it in terms of, yeah,
That's
there
one.
it is. In terms of performance, it was 3 to 4 times faster than the comparable 6800 product.
In the application
For this use.
we were using it for. Absolutely.
In its general instruction execution and everything, it was a
Right.
fast chip, and it turned
was
out
pipeline.
that as we got into designing something, that was critical for being able to leave out half of the circuitry.
Right.
It was 90% software and 10% hardware. Steve and I shared an office about the size of this coffee table, so all ideas were shared by spatial demands. We got to the drawing board, we started designing breadboards, and this is about 100 package first breadboard of the horizontal part of a video game. We figured the processor was fast enough that if Steve was smart enough doing his cycles, it became the kernel, that the computer could take care of the whole vertical part of the screen, and we only needed to build the horizontal part. And we started building wire wrap boards, and this is the first wire wrap board of that schematic. Bob Walker wired it for us, and I designed the hardware and Steve designed the software, and within a very short time, we were used to really quick project cycles. Within a few weeks, we were testing and making objects go and starting to interface the computer, which was a challenge in itself because we didn't really have tools to work with like we have now. This was a board called the Jolt, which was a commercial hobby computer thing. This was a RAM board for actually being able to download the program. And Steve spent many a long night trying to hand code and make it work a little bit, and it was so difficult that we finally hired somebody who was younger and smarter to come in and make it work.
And didn't know it couldn't be done.
Didn't know it couldn't be done.
Right.
Development tools for this thing, for the 6502, hardly existed at all. Okay? What you could do is you could buy a Jolt, you could hook a terminal up to it, you could manually key things into it, it could write things to paper tape, you can put them back in paper tape. You assemble them in your head or on a piece of paper. Okay? Then they had the Kim, which had similar problems, except it also had LEDs and keyboards. So we got a time-sharing account on a commercial computer to do cross-assembly. So we could actually not have to calculate the addresses ourselves for the ROM code. So I got one of these TI terminals that had cassettes in it, and I would key in my source code, record it on cassette, then I would upload it to the time-sharing service, it would assemble it, I would download it to a second cassette, and then I would load it into the hardware. Okay, so they said, you need a password. Password, what do I use, right? So I'm sitting there in my office next to my bicycle. It's an obscure French bicycle called Stella. So I think, Stella, fine, I'll use that for my password. Jay said, that's a cool name. I'll name the project, or the chip that. And Bob Brown, his boss, said, that's a cool name. Let's name the project that. So Jay renamed the chip TIA. Then marketing up at Atari thought, oh, they're naming products after women now. And so everything thereafter was named after a woman, not knowing it was really could have been like Raleigh and Schwinn instead of Colleen and Paula.
Yeah.
So that's where the name came from. But we were struggling with an absence of tools. Apple IIs would have been great development tools, but they didn't exist yet. They came out,
Right.
they really became popular like in 78, 77, long after we shipped Stella.
Because we chose the 6502 and Steve Jobs worked at Atari, so that became the...
And we drove the price down, and
And they
we're
surfed on
starting-
that.
The WestCon show where we found the 6502, which made the economic model possible, was in, late July, early August. And this
No, it was September.
September, I was there too.
September? Okay, and then this was up and running in October, and we had,
Pictures on the screen by November.
Right,
with the first game code in November.
And they hired me and I started the week after Christmas.
right.
I don't think I saw it until
Until it came down.
it came
And
down.
You
then-
came up
then-
and saw it in February of 76, and at the end of that day they told me I was moving to the Santa Clara Valley.
Right. President Joe Keen at the time came in and said, let me get this straight. You're going to use a 6502 microprocessor that was designed, is done by Chuck Peddle, MOS Technology, that was now got bought by Jack Trammell, had bought the company. And now it's going to be sole source to our competitor, basically, from Commodore. And we go, Joe said, tell me how well it will work with a 6800. So I called up the guys and they said, oh, you might get one spot moving every second.
We actually did a prototype.
You
Did
went
a lot of
that far. It
paper
wasn't good. It was pretty ugly.
We figured it out.
So it
It was scary. I
It was
remember.
ugly.
This
So
was-
I went and I managed to negotiate a deal with MOS Technology and got Cinertech set up as a second source. Cinertech also worked out. They had Jay Miner, who was the best guy for doing chips on the planet Earth at that time. And because of our leverage with them buying the other chips, I said, okay, you're going to get the 6502 as a second source, and I'm going to get Jay Miner to work on the part. He said, no, Jay's our guy. So he can still work for you, but he's going to do this thing. And no. And I finally said, look, how many chips do you want to sell us? You got all you want to sell us. You got Jay. So we had Jay came over, and that was the team that came down into Division Street took this thing and made the next generation.
Not to put, Steve Mayer and Ron Milner down, they were in Grass Valley, so we didn't see them much. They were in this research division way up north, and they rarely came down, and Jay basically took it over. And when Joe showed up, and Jay and Joe were working on it, Jay became the figurehead. He was because he had this sort of fatherly, we were all young kids, and he was our mentor. We basically looked to him, so Nolan was younger, and, Nolan was a little bit older than us, and, Nolan was kind of a goof at the time. A great game player, but kind of a goof. Jay was serious, knew what he was doing, extremely competent.
But also relaxed.
But
He wasn't